My greetings to everyone. I am Professor Dr. Namita Rajput, Professor in Department of Commerce, Sri Aurobindo College, University of Delhi. In the ongoing series of Art of Being Happy, today we will be talking on interpersonal relationships and happiness. The flow of the presentation will be like this. We will be talking on what is an interpersonal relationship, followed by its importance in our lives, then about the types of interpersonal relationships and the stages of an interpersonal relationship. So let us start with the definitional aspect of what is an interpersonal relationship. Interpersonal relationships are ongoing interactions between the people that involve the mutual fulfillment of both parties' needs. A key characteristic of interpersonal relationship is that they involve self-disclosure or the sharing of a personal and intimate information about oneself. Even though the relationship dynamics and the norms they vary across cultures, the bonding, attachment and socialization carried out by the interpersonal relationships are very essential for the human development and survival. These relationships are characterized by a range of emotions, behaviors and communication patterns that develop and evolve over time. The quality of an interpersonal relationship is influenced by several factors, including trust, communication, empathy, mutual respect, and shared experiences. For example, according to attachment theory, the formation of deep and ongoing bonds between the people, they aid the intellectual and the physical development. And for this particular reason, people develop their first interpersonal relationship in the early infancy, and people who do not form the strong and stable interpersonal relationship in infancy and the early childhood often suffer the mental and physical problems throughout their lifetimes. Now let us do the importance of interpersonal relationship in our lives. The relationship with others are essential to our quest for happiness and the general well-being. Humans are sociable creatures that thrive on deep relationship with others. And of course, these connections, they give us the emotional support, a sense of community and a greater comprehension of who we are and the world we live in. Now our levels of happiness and the life satisfaction rise when we build a healthy interpersonal relationships. The family and friends' affection and the support, they act as a cushion against the life obstacles, lowering the tension and anxiety. We all benefit much from the camaraderie and mutual understanding that comes from sharing our experiences, joys and sorrows with others. The interpersonal connections, they also present the chances for personal development and the self-discovery. Interpersonal connections also present the chances for the personal development and also for the self-discovery. Now we can develop the personally and have more self-esteem when we receive the constructive criticism from our loved ones, which also enables us to identify our strengths and the places for the progress. The people with strong social ties, they tend to be more resilient, healthier and have a longer lifespans according to research. On the other hand, the social isolation and the loneliness are linked to a number of detrimental health effects and lowering the levels of happiness. So we can say that it is impossible to overstate the value of the human interactions in our lives. not only does the nurturing these connections, they make us very happy, but it also helps us live the lives that are very meaningful and also the purposeful. Now let us move on to our second aspect, that is, what are the different types of interpersonal relationships. Now there are many types of interpersonal relationships, and each one has a distinct influence on the people's sense of self and the well-being. Moreover, one person can fulfill the role of more than one type of relationship. For example, a family member can also be a friend. Now, what are family relationships? The family relationships result from an ongoing interactions between the members of a household who share a blood relationship, such as parents and the birth child, and or a legal relationship, such as the married couples or the parents and the adopted child. The family relationships are definitely unique because oftentimes they are non-voluntary and they are lifelong, and they are not by chance, they are definitely by birth and by the acquired legal relationships. So the family relationships are some of the most important for intellectual and the physical development. Now, in the early childhood, the family relationships are the basis for fulfilling the basic survival needs for food as well as the shelter. Now, moving on to the second part, out of which it is most important, that is friendships. In contrast to the family relationships, friendships are voluntary bonds entered into with people who are not necessarily the blood related or a part of the same household, as opposed to the developing because of the kinship relationships. The friendships usually grow from the shared interest and the beliefs, and for these reasons the friendships will provide the enjoyment and the well-being, and some friendships have a greater level of intimacy than the family relationships. The close friends can begin to feel like family and sometimes even get fictive kinships title such as aunt, uncle or a cousin. Now moving on to the third type. First was family, second was friends, and third we are now going to talk about platonic relationships. In the platonic relationships, people are intimate and bonded in a non-sexual way. The term derived from the Greek philosopher Plato described of non-sexual eros in the Symposium. For Plato, non-sexual love can inspire the ideas and connect people to the divine. For examples, two friends who are deeply connected can inspire each other's creativity. Now moving on to the fourth type of relationship, which we call it as professional relationship. Though the work can encompass the friendships, the family relationships, and even the romantic relationships, professional relationships generally refer to more formal interactions that are focused on the work task. Importantly, they take place in the context of the workplace, which often has explicitly hierarchical relationships and the relations of power. Importantly, they take place in the context of the workplace, which often has explicitly hierarchical relations of the power. The level of formality in the interactions, it varies depending on the nature of hierarchy in the company. For example, the companies that have a very rigid hierarchy, where management holds a lot of power over the decision making, they tend to have a more formal interactions. And formality also depends on the position within a hierarchy. People at the same level will have a less formal interactions than those who occupy a different positions. Now let us talk about the third level, that is the stages of an interpersonal relationships. The interpersonal relationships are not innate or static. They are actually the product of a continuous communication, and thus they can strengthen and weaken depending on the quantity and quality of interactions. The communication scholar. The Mark Knapp model of relational stages identified 10 stages that interpersonal relationships, whether they are romantic, family, professional, go through. Now we talk about these stages. They are not necessarily discrete, and most people skip and also repeat the stages. Out of which, first we will be talk about initiating. All interpersonal relationship begin with some form of initial contact where the people meet. Although in the family relationship, initial contact occurs at birth and thus it is not remembered. Now in this particular stage, the self-disclosure is at the minimum and the people exchange the basic information about themselves. For example, a new student on his first day of school begins the initiation stage when he sits next to someone at lunch and introduces himself. The second stage we talk about is experimenting. During this stage, people start to disclose more about themselves and ask the questions to get to know the other person. And oftentimes at this particular stage, the people realize whether they have a compatible lifestyles and beliefs. For instance, two people on a first date might enter the experimenting stage and quickly find out that they do not have anything in common. The third stage, what you talk about, is intensifying. Now, when you talk about intensifying stage, in this stage, there is a desire to spend more time with and learn more about the other person. The self-disclosure increases and people start to feel more bonded to one another. For example, the new student from the example above starts spending more time with a particular student and learning more about his or her feelings, beliefs and personality. The next is your integrating. Now in this particular stage, people integrate the social support networks and lives become intertwined. When integrating with someone else, people will sometimes adapt the behaviors and the beliefs, changing the parts of who they are, and also people will develop the rituals that are very unique to the relationships. For instance, two friends will develop a system of code words, or a romantic couple will start having a date night every Friday. Now coming on to bonding. In this particular stage, people begin to feel deeply committed to one another and start to identify as a we instead as a separate individual. Now, oftentimes, this commitment will take on a public form like a proposal or a social media status update. Though the bonding of romantic couples is more obvious, other kind of relationships also engage in this kind of a behavior. For example, a lot of organizations like fraternities and sororities, as well as the professional unions, they have a formal bonding ceremonies. Next we have is a differentiating. Now, in every interpersonal relationship that reaches the bonding stage, the togetherness of we often leads to a need to differentiate or to re-establish the separate individual identities. For instance, sometimes the married couple take on a separate hobbies, like one person gardens and the other goes long distance running, so that they can each have something that is very special to themselves as individuals. Next we have is a circumscribing. If people differentiate too much, they can enter the circumscribing stage, where communication decreases and people begin to feel more distant, less committed, and less willing to share their lives with the other persons. Next we have is a stagnation. Stagnation is a period without the growth, where the self-disclosure decreases and nothing is learnt about the self or the other. For examples, two siblings who are having a conflict might stop asking about each other's lives and stop investing time into their relationships. Then we have a stage called avoiding. Moving to avoiding stage may be a way to end the awkwardness that comes with stagnation, as people signal that they want to close down the lines of communication. Communication in the avoiding stage can be very direct, and I don't want to talk to anyone more, or more indirect, I have to meet someone in a little while, so I can't wait and talk long. While physical avoidance, such as leaving a room or requesting a schedule change at work, may help clearly communicate the desire to terminate the relationship, and we don't always have that option. Next stage is your terminating stage. This is the final stage, and this final phase is the conclusion of a bond. The connection ends because of accompanying causes like separation or divorce. Now, it is where the rude and unpleasant words are used against each other and expose their weakness. It is always essential to take the great care of yourself and your feelings apart from the person you are within a relationship. So basically, we have to talk about all these stages in one go so that we are able to find out what kind of relationship and the different stages are we talking about. Let us quickly have the stages of the interpersonal relationship what we discussed. Definitely they are not static and they actually do not follow the same order. Sometimes they skip and sometimes a different order is actually followed. The first step was initiating. In this particular stage, we try and know each other more. For example, a new student on his first day of school begins to initiate the stage when he sits next to someone at the lunch and introducing himself. Then we go in for an experimenting where we try to realize that whether we match or the mental qualities match or anything is common is there or not. If you find something in common, then you try and intensify the stage, which is definitely a big desire to spend more time with and learn more about the other person. Then we go in for an intensifying stage, and of course, it is a system where definitely the relationship is intensified, followed by moving on a bonding stage. And in this particular stage, people begin to feel deeply committed to one another and start as a we instead of a separate I. Often, this commitment will take on a public form like a proposal or a social media status update. Now we need to go in for a next stage called differentiating. As we have already discussed, in every interpersonal relationship that reaches the bonding stage, the togetherness of we often leads to the differentiation stage, and we need to re-establish the individual identities. Like for example, if you're married, so you are trying to follow your own hobbies so that you have something of distinct of your own, which is special to the individuals only. And then we have a circumscribing phase. So if the people differentiate too much, they can enter into a circumscribing phase where the communication decreases, they feel distant, less committed, and of course, they're not willing to share anything now, and they have nothing now in common to talk. So there is a big distance in the relationship, followed by a stagnation, which is definitely a period without the growth. And of course, for example, the two siblings who have a very conflict mind stop asking about each other's life and they become a very distant. So slowly and steadily they start avoiding, and after the avoiding stage, the last stage is your termination stage, which is definitely a complete separation or a divorce. So all these things are very unpleasant, and definitely it leads to expose your weaknesses, and it also essentially take a great care of yourself and your feelings apart from the persons you are within a relationship. So all these things have to be kept in mind when you are moving on to the interpersonal relationship dynamics. Thank you so much.